All right. So today I have some difficulties with the camera, so you can only see the screen. And you have to just listen to us today instead of just seeing us.
And I did my hair this morning.
Oh, that's.
I was gonna wear a baseball cap today.
Actually, I can call bullshit on that because I see how your hair looks like. Thankfully, we're talking about get raw metadata, not try get raw hair. So Tomasz, can you give us a brief overview of what that thing is for and what the context is?
Yeah, so the context is scripting, scripting at runtime, extending your application, providing a way how to run snippets of code against runtime metadata, because on client machines you don't have contracts, you don't have SDKs, you just have runtime metadata. And so this is what we are going to deliver for update 1. And we have APIs that you can run, that you can use to run C# scripts, VB scripts, and they need metadata to compile against. And on CoreCLR, there is no way currently to access the runtime metadata that were loaded into memory for assemblies. On desktop, there is a property on the assembly called location that points to a file on disk. It only works for metadata on disk, so that's one limitation, and the other limitation is it only works on desktop. It doesn't work on CoreCLR, Project N, etc. So we need some different mechanism to get the metadata, and this is the proposal how to do that. So if you scroll down, there's the.
And this does not just affect scripting. This actually had a pretty big effect on the Roslyn API surface for the same reason. When creating a compilation, it's very common for people to do things like type of .assembly, like I would like to reference whatever type this assembly is defined in. And in the past, under the hood, it was reflecting into the location property to find the item to reference. And it was impactful enough that when we pulled it out of Roslyn at the last minute, we couldn't even delete the API. We just had to obsolete it because we felt that it was going to have too much of an impact. And we would love to be able to unobsolete it and bring this API back where you can give us a type and we can make it very easy to create compilations in code. But the whole reason we really need the type is we've got to crack that metadata. And we can't crack that metadata essentially without some API like this. And this has a downstream effect on scripting as well.
Right, so the API Jared mentioned, it's not like that if you had like real complex build system like MS build and stuff like that, it wouldn't use it obviously, because you have to compile against contracts, that's given. But for very simple tools that people just write 10 lines of code to do something easy, right? They need a little bit of metadata here. They don't care about whether it's contract or runtime. It just works for runtime, so that's fine. So you want to provide convenience API, right? So that people don't need to think about, I need to now find a reference or something in some directory and which one do I use, etc. When you have MS Code in memory and you do in-memory operations only on desktop, whatever, you can use the stuff that you have right there.
So in a sense, you want to blend the metadata environment of the host with the script itself, right? Which basically requires you to just pass something to the other side, and you want to use reflection to do that, and then the other side
right.
to just get the metadata.
Yeah, so we were thinking about, would it be possible, because reflection is exposing exactly, well, not exactly, but roughly the data we want. The problem is, as I mentioned in the proposal, well, there are actually multiple problems. Not all data is exposed. The style how it is exposed is essentially object model, versus reader, and consuming that object model and transforming it into Roslyn object model gets quite complex. It adds overhead, obviously, on top of overhead the reflection already has, which is huge compared to raw metadata reading. So, and there are troubles with loading types and stuff like that I listed. So I concluded that yes, it would be, sort of possible. It would be very painful, very slow, and it wouldn't allow us to have high fidelity reading, right? It would behave differently than when you compile against contracts, which is not desirable.
In long term, it's also just a maintenance cost for us. Every time we evolve our symbol API, the least little bit, and then we have to go and like update reflection, as opposed to metadata reading. Like this is the proposed API from raw metadata. Like this is just how we import libraries, and if we had it available, it would collapse our code significantly.
Yeah, essentially the high level bit here is that the format or the data that should be the currency for talking about metadata should be the ECMA or other well-defined formats that are serialized into a blob.
Yep.
Not an object model. That reflection is great for certain things,
Sure,
but it's not great for being consumed by a compiler, right? So that's the important distinction. I kind of compare these two approaches to XML document versus XML reader. So XML reader is fast reader that doesn't allocate any object model, doesn't force any object model on you, right? Versus XML document, you need to load everything and you have a huge memory footprint. You have then convenient, operations on that, but that's not what the compiler needs.
Yep.
And it's also, I think that it goes further because with XML document and XReader, there's no fidelity loss.
Right.
With reflection, we lose necessary fidelity. Like for instance, I don't think custom modifiers are fully exposed to reflection.
Type forwarder, type layouts.
Yeah, and custom modifiers in particular, like we are taking, the biggest fix we're taking to update one is our support for custom modifiers in the compiler.
Yeah.
And it would be doing all that work and losing it if we had to go over reflection. It would just be yet another random gap that people have to deal with.
No, I completely buy that. You don't want married to object models, right? That's just outside for trouble. Especially if both are based on the same metadata format. That's just gambling, right?
Just needs to force.
So here's where I was saying that the name of the API.
Meta. Yeah, there's a T.
Okay.
Metadata.
So just clean it up before.
Should just leave it in and
Guess
see whether somebody finds it.
I'll have to document then.
Metadata.
It's almost like music when you see ta-da. So, Mike, remember, like, why did we remove location from assembly? Was that like the Renate push and removed everything that had path-based APIs?
Well, it's not just path-based. So yeah, there was that. That's less relevant today as we put file system API everywhere, but it has to do a lot with an effort to, first of all, if you think about .native, basically you don't want, at the level of reflection, you don't really want to be sort of at the level of like getting from a type to its type info. You don't want to be having some tie-in to like where it was loaded from disk or whatever. That's like a responsibility that we sort of have at the hosting level. So we have this like system runtime loader that like DNX plugs into it. It decides where things are loaded from. It can compile things in memory also in some cases. And like it's basically, we don't want to have this. We don't want to have this at the level of I have any type. I shouldn't be, figuring out location on disk. It's sort of like a separation of concerns there. And then of course, like on .NET Native, there are no locations to speak of. And so reflection is a core concept to any sort of .NET environment, but sort of files on disk is something that we want to be like, I would say, sort of tied more to the particular, runtime environment, which not necessarily anywhere you have type infos would you have assembly locations, kind of a thing, right?
I think it's kind of an evolution. Like when we did 1.0 of .NET, all assemblies have apps.
Yep.
It made sense. As we move forward, we have in-memory assemblies, like you said. We have .NET Native, we have DNX, we have all these things. Like it's a contract that we can't fulfill on all implementations. And like you said, CoreFX did a good job of divorcing those concepts and saying that assemblies don't have locations. And
even
I like to kind of stay that way because it really is important. It also removes a lot of kind of gotchas now that we've done from when we're going from like contracts and facades and implementation. I think a lot of consumers would be really surprised to know that like type of blah.assembly, location is actually quite different than what you would expect it to be.
Sure, I would just to play devil's advocate. You already see this by the assembly.
We'll encounter surprises here too of that variety, but yes.
I'm not surprised that things go wrong there.
No, but to your point, if you say type of string and on .NET Native, right? You may be surprised that the answer will not point you to something that involves system runtime, but some other assembly, right?
Oh, no, I think that people are going to be.
That's known.
No, yeah.
We will handle that on the scripting API.
Dot assembly is a runtime convention, and I think it's not a compile time convention.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that some of the stuff is already like leaking out. But I think the location part, like to your point, .NET Native, it just makes more sense because we merge everything together, and then we have these, metadata I don't know what was the name for that. It was something like a namespace. It wasn't called namespace, but it had like scope. That was that they used to actually emulate assemblies. And it seems like location wouldn't fly with that at all because they will all point to the same thing. And then the question is, what would you expect metadata reader to do? So I mean, So the idea would be that we would have this API that, given an assembly, we can get the blob, and then let's say, .NET Native has different metadata that it's not ECMA, it's something else. So the expectation is that the consumer kind of has to parse that blob.
So
figure out whether the format is something they support or not.
Yeah, correct. And they decide what reader they want to use. And if there is no blob available or the blob is not understood by the reader, then that's tough luck. This API returns false, or the blob will contain something that the consumer won't be able to consume. Then it needs to report the error up. Right? So in scripting, we would report an error. Well, you cannot add a reference to this thing. Sorry. Right? But that would be fine. That's okay. It will be in 90% scenario it will work, so people will probably not even hit that. And so right now, for the scenarios that currently consumers have access to, on project end scripting is not relevant anyway, because you can't code-gen. So I don't think that's gonna be an issue. There are some considerations around ENC and dynamic, reflection emit code-gen, how it's gonna work with this, and we concluded that for now it's gonna return the initial image that was used to when assembly loaded, not the latest snapshot after ENC. So ENC won't work with scripts, in the sense that if I ENC type that the script is accessing, it will still see the old version of the new one. But we have the same problem with reflection in general already, and we would like to address that, but we can certainly address that using a different API, but that's for another discussion, and it's going to be a bigger feature request.
So that's a good point. So that would change so it's not a transparent feature, right? You would basically have, you would need two things, right? You would at least need a notification API that the metadata was changed.
Right. So I have some ideas how to make ENC work with reflection and dynamically changing stuff, but that's for, I think, another. That's out of scope of this API. We concluded that this API will, by definition, gives you the initial snapshot, and there will be no issues with dynamically allocated blobs on lifetime and blah blah blah. So just to make it simple, and in future we would certainly like to make ENC better for these scenarios, right? And then we will come up with some other proposal. We can add some overload or some other API to get the delta or something.
This is proposed to go with system.runtime.loader. Is that, like as mentioned, we have the assembly context. Load context is the new concept there. So right now, the only thing that I can see that might be a bit of a problem for Roslyn as a portable entity is that when you have this concept of the assembly load context is like we don't implement assembly load context on desktop, nor do we implement app domain on CoreCLR. So you have to be slightly less than portable. You have to either.
We will need to use the location on desktop still.
Right. Okay.
Why can we not implement this API on desktop?
This API
that would be a bigger
assembly loader.
Because,
we already have the. So for us, I guess, why is this assembly loader extension? I guess because why is that not assembly extensions?
Yeah, there's nothing to do with the loader.
I don't know why. Never mind the name, the class name, but which contract it goes into, because I think that was a desire, to represent some people on the thread who aren't here. Is that we put it with the loader because that contract exists specifically to allow interaction with the like where things came from and how they're represented versus
So what do you mean when you say with the loader?
There's a contract called system.runtime.loader, which is like the way that assemblies are loaded in CoreCLR, basically, right?
Is that a portable contract? Is that a contract that's on
it's
desktop?
currently, I mean, you can imagine it going to other, but it's one of the things that we decided was really CoreCLR only, because it's envisioned as something for like the sort of the at the level of like say a DNX already doing a lot of different things in order to give they're the host of this app model, so they have very different things they have to do to kind of get an app to run on desktop or get an app. They're already in this world of like understanding the differences between these platforms at the level of sort of loading things. So we don't actually map this concept back. It's one of the few contracts that is not intended really like, let's say like you use it all over your class libraries. Like it's something that sort of happens on that, sort of wires up the loading, but then something sets up the context, but it's not currently something that you find sort of used, in your typical portable class library. So if Roslyn were to take a dependency on it, you would have a similar kind of having to switch between.
And I guess we already do that in scripting because we do load assemblies. Anyway, so my take on this is yes, I think it would be possible to backport on desktop. It would be costly because the model is different.
So what do you mean by backport?
So
this API?
Like
or
no, not this API. That wouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The assembly loader context and stuff like that, right? So it would be possible to make it available on desktop. I think it would be costly, and I'm not sure if the semantics would need like would be easy to match the semantics, right?
The semantics will be different. I guess what you're saying is we have I'm guessing you would prefer we go back to essentially having that old API we had where like get a metadata reference for an assembly value.
No, so
in Roslyn, I was imagining you're going to say like have the API, revive the API in Roslyn where we say basically assembly to metadata reference. Right. Internally, we know, we already have a CoreCLR shim and a compiler, or we know, I'm on CoreCLR, use like shim these APIs.
That's what we are going to do, yes.
So that will produce, I agree that is a path forward for us if we have like this on CoreCLR and we just use .location on desktop, but there will be subtle semantic differences, correct? And that is returned. And I just want to make sure that we're comfortable with those subtle semantic differences. It's CoreCLR desktop, it's okay.
I don't think that.
So what will be the differences?
The difference is that it's how we load the metadata. Because what we're trying to get from this is we want to load a metadata reference, okay, over this metadata.
Yep.
So in one case, we're going to be using a byte pointer that's given to us by the CoreCLR. Okay. You guys manage the lifetime of that is going to be as long as the CoreCLR is up, but the loader kind of
as long as the assembly is up.
Right, as long as assembly's up. But then that also means, though, that CoreCLR, you control the contractor. Does that lock the assembly on disk if it's a disk assembly?
Oh, I see.
As opposed to if we load from the location, we're kind of introducing our semantics on whether or not did we take a read lock on that on disk?
Well, on the other hand, on desktop, the assembly is already locked always. If you get a location for a runtime assembly, it's already locked.
Unless it's shadow copied, but then we're locking the shadow.
We are not getting the original one. Then.
Right, but I'm just saying, there can be subtle differences at play. Are we okay with those?
I would be okay.
I think the answer is likely yes, but there's a subtle distinction on who owns, like how that is.
Because wasn't exposed the notion of a location, depending on how you get the metadata reference?
No, we killed that as part of killing. This effort kind of killed that.
It wouldn't be observable whether you got it either via assembly.location or a byte pointer. Right. So
these are all kind of the whole. You divorced the concept, and as a result, we had.
I guess the only question, but it seems like the only other interesting differences is at first, some of the potential here for improving situations like ENC or cases where there are no location but there is metadata.
That's a big improvement.
Right, but there may be, but I don't know because there are some lifetime questions and we kind of said these would be only in the static cases anyways for this API. But if it weren't, like there's some potential for improvement from this API, but if we put it in a place you can only call in CoreCLR, some of those same improvements can't necessarily be potentially like you can imagine, being able to get metadata in cases where there is no file on disk. You don't, if you only can use location on desktop, then you might have like, it's unclear to me if there's actually going to be a big delta because we're only going to use this like for the things that we have.
So I think the only delta that I can think of is on desktop if you do assembly load from byte array, and we don't have any way to get the metadata even on desktop because there's no location there. And this is of course on the API. But I think that's okay. I mean, for now at least, because you cannot do that today anyways, and so there is no take back, and people kind of are used to it not working, right?
Right.
The same thing here. If you reflection emit something, you won't be able to do it, right? That's still fine. I mean, it's a try method, right?
I agree.
Best effort. There is metadata. If there is no metadata we can access, well, then we report the error upstream, and that just means that people who really want to add a reference to dynamically generated reference generated assembly won't be able to do that right now. That's bad, or I don't know. That's a feature request. If there is a lot of people that want to do that, well, then we should address that in some other way.
It seems like just in the general thing, this is try, and sometimes there are cases that it's not possible to provide, and the scripting will fail. And then Roslyn, it's not incorrect if on some platforms like it fails in less cases. Like it's just by its nature, it's a best effort to get metadata. So if some platforms can make a better effort, then the better effort will surface to you on that platform. Like it's not, it does cause a change in behavior, but it seems like it's already defined as, we're going to ask the runtime for a best effort to give us metadata, and if we don't get it, it's an error. And like, you know what I mean? Like we know, like for the common cases that for the 90% cases, it's going to work equally. And if there is some variation in like over time in the 10% case, then it just means that some platforms are going to have work in more scenarios than others.
But we can give you metadata back. Is that basically things like
reflection emit?
Right. Okay. So ref emit. Interesting. So we don't have a metadata representation. Remember?
Well, we do, but not in contiguous block of memory. There is a method that serializes it, but
then you have to worry about lifetime issues too and stuff like that, right? Like, so we're not returning that, but from the API shape, it's like the other one's pretty obvious. Like you're not getting metadata if there's no file on disk. Definitely not, right? Because it gives you a location. In the desktop case, so in this case, there's in very similar cases where you're not getting a location, you're going to get false here, but it's less clear that that's always the case, or that always will be the case, right?
It should be documented, that currently it doesn't support these scenarios, but that's fine. We can remove those unsupported scenarios if we support them in future.
But we might need to have a different surface for the other scenarios, like if there are lifetime issues, or I don't know.
We can try get latest snapshot or whatever data.
So like, how do we think about lifetime in general? Like, do we think that like we need some way to manage that, or do we just think giving back a raw pointer and then being on one?
Yeah, I think if we define and document that the lifetime of the point is valid as long as the assembly is alive, then it's up to the host to keep the assembly alive while reading the data, right?
But
basically what Roslyn would do is, package it into some object that represents the metadata in our word, and that will have a reference to the assembly and then the pointer, right? So that object will be,
But do we even give? I'm actually not even sure what unloading support there is today with
But only when you
with
kill the
assembly
absolute
load context. I don't know. I don't know if we even support unloading context right now, but I don't know.
So as far as I know, it was designed to support it in future.
I see.
Right. So if that's supported, we shouldn't start changing the contrast.
But you would need to have the loader would need to give you another API to actually figure out, because today I don't think.
Why would it need to?
Well, how would you know? You have the assembly and the.
No, but as long as you keep the assembly config alive, it cannot be unloaded anyways.
I see.
So as long as
I see. I see. Makes sense.
the same with subdomain, right? If I pass the pointer to different subdomain, well, that's kind of sad, right? That should not be like recommended. It should rather be discouraged. But
Are there any versioning considerations? I mean, I'm assuming that the idea is that the metadata format's well-defined, and if people are going to be able to parse files themselves, they should be able to parse the byte array, the byte star that comes out of this. But for different platforms, are there considerations where, like you were mentioning, metadata formats can be in different formats?
Right. So the idea is that you get a pointer, and every reasonable format has some header. So you parse the header, you see, oh, I don't understand this, so that's not something I have a reader for, so I'm not going to use it, or I cannot use it. Or if you recognize the signature, oh, this is ECMA 335, I have the reader here, I can pass it the pointer, and everything is good, right?
Would that have helped us in the? Would that strategy have helped us in the? We did have a metadata change between 1.0 and 2.0, correct?
You mean the CLR one? Yeah.
Would that magic number have helped us here? We changed the number enough that okay, so that would.
I believe so. Yes. That was a change in the meta version.
Then we're just basically we're basically in some ways committing that if we do have another metadata change going forward, that we would have to either be extensible or.
No, that's supported by the format. The format is very versionable, and across formats we have the signature.
Right.
Not that Jared wants to change the metadata format at all.
Are there different formats for the different platforms that we have on current versions right now, or are they all the same?
We really only have one documented format at this time.
Yes.
And then .NET Native has another format, but it's not, it's not something that you can really figure out right now. It's not intended. A lot of thought would have to go into but it's certainly it's certainly imaginable that just like that we won't have ECMA metadata, but we might have something that is equally, fits the scenario that he's talking about, that can be read by something like a system reflection metadata, or even system reflection metadata might be able to provide a view over different formats. But regardless, we could have other blobs potentially, but in practice, like right now, there's I don't think we would give out the .NET Native metadata just yet, because it's it's not something that's
So it's important to say that it's designed to be versioned, right? So we don't need to go back and then change something in future.
Right.
So the versioning is there. It should be fine.
And so it seems like the only thing that we need to think about is where we put this guy now, right? Because system reflection loader may be the best location, maybe not the best one. I personally think
that's what the answer
probably go.
That was the suggestion I saw. It seems to make sense to me, right? Because
to put it in the same.
To put it it's a location where you also have things like, that's how you can get assembly names from paths. That's where you load from paths. So I guess there's no path here, but it is puts it in a.
It seems orthogonal though. You could easily imagine .NET Native we give you the raw .NET Native metadata, but we don't have the story for assembly loading, right? Dynamically on the fly. So tying these two features together doesn't seem like a super smart idea. Also, given that we already say try, I honestly wouldn't feel too bad if we literally put it with reflection, because quite frankly, we can always support the API and always return false. Like the API is already designed with LiDAR, right? There's really not a reason to put it in secondary contract. Right.
I don't have strong opinion.
I don't have a strong opinion either. Feels like this might be a bit. I suppose the fact that, I guess it is called try, but the fact that we'll have platform, if we put in reflection, it's basically on every platform for forever kind of thing.
Well, my point is it's already keyed off of
assembly,
right?
Loader, you have some. But yeah, it does allow you to return false.
It might be kind of weird if this got onto desktop and you return false.
Yes.
Because you always have to make that.
We can make it work on desktop, but that actually does create, so that's not really like we would have to make it work on desktop, which is not a bad thing. That would solve some of the portability concerns.
Kind of nice.
The only problem is that
hold my breath waiting.
I mean, I think I agree with you, but I do think, it might be a bit sort of like, you could imagine that as things evolve, because, there's a lot of discussion about sort of like the future scenarios and lifetimes and stuff. And I know I'm hand waving here, but you can imagine that like as the things actually materialize, and we have more scenarios and more platforms, and like that this might not be like, just a static byte star is not the thing, but sitting there always that returns false. And there's this other thing, it's in reflection, whereas if it's over in the loader, it's a little more tied to some kind of like
putting it on the side, I'm certainly
kind of sort of separate kind of things. A few people deal with the loading, but like the assembly is kind of like a prominent thing. But so maybe I'd be worried about the sort of real estate there also, even though like it's not wrong to always return false. I just wonder if it end up looking slightly odd, but I don't know. Yeah.
I think that was Jan's concern, that if it's he would prefer it to be kind of in very specialized API.
No, that's to me that's somewhat of I mean that's true. I would not like to see it on assembly by default for sure, right? All I was saying is I wouldn't literally physically put it on the assembly type. I would probably put it in an extension method in a separate namespace at least. But the question is, where would
services? Everything goes there.
Something like that.
Probably not bad. It is a compiler.
It is compiler.
Another option if we put it in an existing assembly, the only downside for desktop is that, well, if we have the API there, then we have to touch desktop. If we can put it in a secondary assembly, we can literally support it on desktop today by just returning false, right? So the API is always guaranteed to be there because we can ship it out of band. So if we put it in a secondary contract, we have that ability. My only concern is, like, it seems like an orthogonal feature to assembly loading to me. Like if Jan feels
orthogonal, like I mean, whomever sort of loaded.
Well, take .NET Native. You can get assembly objects. You can totally picture, well, you get metadata for those, but you don't load assemblies on the fly. Like it is somewhat orthogonal in that sense, right?
Oh, well, you had to.
You don't do that now.
Well, sure, but that's true for any new API that we don't do anything today, right?
My thinking is like putting it in the loader like is fine, and that like you could have some you could like it wouldn't bother me if we decide later that like once we've like really looked all up at some of the other things that would involve these scenarios, like, and it wouldn't be the end of the world if like you could get it from the loader and you can also get it from somewhere else versus vice versa. It's like if you put something in a reflection contract, it should be something that you're sort of like you want it to be like a reflection feature, like what I mean, like versus sort of like right now, this really is like, I mean, maybe it's just a question of namespace, but this really is kind of a like sort of a concern that is pretty uncommon. Most use of reflection does not want to drop down to metadata at all. They want the convenience of.
Well, I'm not arguing for putting it in reflection. I'm arguing for putting it in a third bucket.
But I just don't want to. Yeah, okay. So, but would you? Yeah, then this creates the other problem of end up creating a bunch more.
So we have to decide about namespace and then the contract.
Right. I think we're okay with the.
So the namespace seems to be the best namespace to system reflection data. Right.
Could do that.
So let me.
ECMA, no, ECMA.
Not ECMA.
Specific.
Where's the?
That would be good. Because then it'd be close to the thing that can load it.
Contract wise, I don't understand contracts, so it's up to you guys.
Okay, so, well, I don't know, I thought the loader thing coming in was going to be a slam dunk because, you had talked about it beforehand. I still think it makes sense.
Another thing, maybe another observation.
Yeah.
So we are talking with other people on the debugger and diagnostics team. They need some tokens and stuff, and sometimes they want to find symbols for the DLL, and so it's what one might imagine another API that is TryGetPE image, right? If it's available, right? Or PE headers or something. Right?
And also,
Some more. This gets just the raw metadata section, right? But in some scenarios where you actually want to find the PDB associated with the assembly, you need to enter a PE image because there is a debug directory that you want to look up, right? And so there might be some other stuff in the PE, like resources or whatnot, right? That not for our scenarios, but for some future scenarios, they might be interesting. So I can imagine more APIs that give you access to.
So I would argue that would most certainly ending up going into a separate assembly because that assembly would then be tied to metadata, right? Because you want to return a PE image, right?
Well, the PE image is byte array as well, right? Or not byte array.
Well, fair enough. You could always return bytes. It's true.
Yeah. And then you have the PE reader that takes bytes.
Well, there was the other issue that they need. There's also the issue of, but then that does tie formats into it. But there's also the issue of being able to get tokens from. So if you wanted to correlate, objects in reflection to the format. So we also have another outstanding issue. I think I linked to it in here, which was talking about, can we in that symbol. So you can imagine those living together, and then you could also imagine that slightly resetting a bit of what we were talking about earlier about not having the format. But I think the direction on the other one was like we would have again, try to get a token, but it's or try to get RVA or so there could be. You can imagine the entire thing being like I don't know system.reflection. Yeah, or something, and then basically has a lot of APIs of the shape, try to get me this and try to get me that, and sometimes they're in different formats, so it's kind of like a runtime scenario.
So you already have runtime extension for reflection, right? You have system reflection runtime extension, something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
We have that, maybe. We have to design extend. It does probably make sense to put these together then with the other probably. That seems, we haven't decided where those go yet because we haven't done the review for that yet. So, but it probably sounds like, seems pretty similar, and that was like it's similar in that like the APIs are like they may or may not give you what you want, and they're sort of tied to these low level kind of either diagnostic or compiling or like somebody who's sort of intimately aware of sort of like these runtime details. So not not a mainline reflection scenario, but coming from a reflection object.
You're talking about the request to get essentially metadata tokens from
right, and also
reflection objects,
right? Right, it's not reflection dot. Metadata, something like that. Yeah.
Okay,
this
so
might be also interesting for us. People are asking, are there APIs to map runtime type to Roslyn type symbol, right? That's just, every other week we get this question, right? And yes, well, you can take the name, try to find the name, you can substitute the generic stuff and arrays and whatnot. And we have some helpers internally that we can expose. But perhaps if we get the token, we can do it much more efficiently. Right?
It's just that anyone who's going to be using these APIs is going to be in the business of, like, we're going to do it in such a way that, like, all of these things may or may not be there. So that will have to be,
yeah, that's true.
It'll have to be sort of.
So we would still need to have more general mechanisms. But the way how we do that is good already.
And also, like, depending on how you're compiling. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, so from my point of view, how we want to proceed? Do we want to first talk about the other APIs then, like metadata APIs for the tokens to actually to understand what that scenario would be before we make a decision where this guy goes, or?
I think we don't really have enough of we should probably need a better write-up for the other issue, but we can.
No, not right now. I'm just saying that because as far as a follow-up, before we make a decision for the location here, we should look at the other the other APIs.
Probably make sense.
We probably can treat this as one feature and do it, all up with the tokens and the
That time-wise, scheduling-wise, it's kind of important.
Right. So the other
we have nothing. We cannot do anything with scripting on CoreCLR right now. It just does not work.
I see.
So if you wanna go out and say, oh, there's the CoreCLR, and you can run the script somewhere, right? At the same time, then this is his high priority feature to get in.
Okay.
So like I understand priority that it's important, but my question is it urgent?
Well, actually, so Nick found a workaround. I think you left behind
code base.
Code base.
Yeah.
So
that would come up at some point.
I mean, so the workaround is like a bug, effectively.
Yeah.
As long as the bug is there until this, we can use it just to get something going, right?
Yeah, I mean, alternatively, we can just. I mean, since Jan proposed it, I don't think it would be terrible to put it in assembly, a system runtime loader, and then as we design the other feature, we may decide to put it somewhere else. But then you may have to change your code. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's actually fine because we are not the preview, of course, doesn't need to be like all done.
But your goal is by November to ship a preview of scripting, correct?
That's gonna for it's gonna be kind of RTM for desktop, but preview for
CoreCLR. Yeah. Okay. So
that change stuff.
Okay. So
that makes sense to put it in the CoreCLR. And then I don't think it would be the end of the world if it stayed there, even if it ended up being two places to get it eventually. Like, because the runtime loader is very specific contract. It's not like there's a bunch of risk of that sort of being the wrong place.
All right.
Cool. Sounds good. Yep. Cool. Right. I think namespace, we already said probably like system runtime compiler services, right?
Maybe system reflection metadata. We said maybe.
Oh, interesting.
Or be okay with.
Compiler services is kind of kitchen sink. I'm not sure if you should put everything in there that the compiler uses.
The interesting thing about reflection metadata is that if you glue these together, like you can discover like, oh, a byte array. I wonder what I should do with this, and then like you can also figure out what to do with it.
For the namespace, you have the reader right there.
Yeah, it is an interesting idea.
I think it fits together.
Yeah, I mean, usually my concern would be that people don't find the API, but that's not an API you want people to.
Yeah. You don't want people to find this API.
No, but if they have that namespace, then they may be exactly the people who'll be interested in.
Oh, if they already parsed metadata, yeah.
So,
once you have the reader, you kind of want to see this, that you can actually instantiate it from somewhere.
I think so.
Cool. All right, then thanks for the folks online. There are no questions. Then I think we'll send out the notes later. Thanks, guys.